Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1133 makes good on a reunion nearly 20 years in the making and leaves us on such a wholesome note, but there's much more to the chapter than just a heartfelt moment, as there are a ton of little details that continue to build out our understanding of the world that is Elbaf, so let's get right into it. We start things off with our 20th entry into the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Circuit Pilgrimage cover story, as we find Tama having been taken once again by none other than Hold'em. This was one of our first minor antagonists of Act 1 of Wano, who had initially abducted Tama in order to make use of her Devil Fruit powers. It seems he has defeated Speed thanks to his own Smile Fruit abilities, more specifically Kamijiro, the lion growing out of Hold'em's abdomen, who can somehow breathe fire. In his hand, he also wields his Trick Mechanism sword, which we saw early on in Wano, but it got a bit more screen time in the anime, as it was shown to be able to deconstruct into a whip that could be set on fire. Perhaps we'll get to see this for the first time in the manga in the next cover story entry. Now, believe it or not, I had actually speculated if the silhouette we saw back in 1124 belonged to Hold'em, mostly going off of the hairstyle we see here and him having been stationed in the region of Kuri. We last saw the character back toward the start of Act 3 as he went to set flame to Okobore town, and you'll notice how he is now sporting a cloak over his normal attire, likely in an effort to remain hidden when taking action, though one has to wonder whether or not he's the same person behind all of the crimes throughout the region. To recap, on top of the attempted abduction we saw in 1124, we've also learned the foreman Minotomo and some girls from the soba shop have gone missing as well. More recently, someone stole Yasue's blade while Yamato was sleeping, and it's not entirely clear if that person is responsible for the aforementioned abductions as well. There could be at least 3 different perpetrators across all of these acts, including Hold'em here, who already has a pre-established motivation for wanting to take Tama and her Devil Fruit powers. Now, we've talked before about how it's not certain how many, if any, of Kaido's forces were actually taken in by the Marines. Hold'em having been stationed in Kuri could just mean that he slipped away through Ryokogyu's assault on Udon, leaving him as one of the few remaining Animal Kingdom pirates in the country. But it's also important to remember that Hold'em is actually a native Wano resident. During Oden's flashback, we were introduced to a shaman who at the time was unnamed but bore a striking resemblance to the headliner. Many had speculated that this may be Hold'em himself, but we eventually learned thanks to the Vivre guards that this was his father, Norinosuke. It doesn't seem like Hold'em intends on returning to a peaceful life given how he's attempting to rob our team here, but I am interested in if he'll want to continue living in Wano or if he's intending to leave the country. Having abducted a skilled carpenter like Minotomo could mean he's interested in having a ship constructed. It would also be cool if Yamato actually ends up taking Hold'em under their wing, sort of like how Oden did with the Scabbards. Maybe Yamato could even create a pirate crew out of the remnants of the Animal Kingdom pirates. I guess we'll just have to see. But that said, let's get into chapter 1133, Nice Things. This chapter starts off with a flashback to the aftermath of Ohara 22 years ago. We get a closer look at the civilian evacuation ship that was ordered to be sunk by Sakazuki, but the official stance of the world government attributes this to Nico Robin, as told to a group of reporters here by CP9 director Spandine. Last we saw him in the manga was over 500 chapters ago in the CP9 cover story, as he plotted at revenge against the CP9 agents alongside his son, Spandam. However, it was recently revealed to us in Volume 109's SPS that over the last 2 years, Spandine had colluded with some underworld criminals and escaped level 6 impelled down prisoners, only to be foiled by Lucci and CP9. This resulted in Spandine losing his status and CP9 being reinstated into the government under CP0. It would seem Spandine is currently ill in the present day, but we have yet to see what he looks like now. We get a montage of Robin's childhood as she evades the world government, and some of these scenes are familiar as we get one of this old lady who had sold Robin out to the government agents, Moneypenny. There's also one of Robin picking through trash alongside a dog in a snowy city, which is a reminiscent of the scene from her flashback with a different dog in a pile of garbage in a rainy town. Tragically, there's even a scene of her contemplating taking her own life before remembering what her mother, Olvia, had instructed her. She also reminisces on Saul's final words to her, promising her that she would find real friends. And in one of the most heartbreaking scenes in this sequence, we find Robin visiting an outdoor market looking through a book of maps, only to find that Ohara has been erased completely. This lets us know that the scene is taking place at least a year after the destruction of Ohara, as we learn that the island had disappeared from maps in the following year. It's a bit unsettling to get this scene after all of these years, especially knowing just how much this realization had haunted Robin all of her life. She draws the island in herself, preserving the history and voices of the past as the scholars before her had done, before getting caught by someone. And as a quick aside, all of this is particularly interesting with the context of God Valley, another island in the West Blue that had been erased from maps 16 years prior to Ohara. According to Sengoku, not only was the island's existence removed from all documentation, but the island itself disappeared entirely. This is strikingly different from Nohara, as its ruins were still accessible, at least several months after the Buster Call. Perhaps it no longer stands today. In any case, all of this just fuels more suspicions and questions regarding the disappearance of God Valley. We've speculated on the channel before if Gecko Moria's thriller bark was crafted using the island. There are some timeline irregularities to account for, and I won't get into that topic in full in this video, but be sure to check out my 1096 breakdown for more details if you're interested. As Robin runs away from all of these lies and hurtful words thrown at her, she tries to hold back tears and laughs toward a better future, bringing us back to present day. We get another landscape shot of Elbaf's exteriors, this time including the rainbow that was drawn in the last chapter, extending out from the coast to the sunworld. It appears that the rainbow leads right into a sea of clouds, not unlike the white sea that we first encountered on our journey to the island in the sky. As discussed in previous breakdowns, the majority of this half of the crew was absent from the adventure on Skypiea, so these concepts are largely foreign to them. The captains command the crew to anchor in the port, which reminded me a lot of the Straw Hats, wondering if dropping an anchor was even effective when they first arrived. Now, this area is introduced as the port of the Western Village. This probably is not super significant in the grand scheme of things, but I should bring up the existence of the Peak of High West. This was an alternate means of entering the White Sea that was first mentioned by Gonfall, but is yet to be expounded upon. Now, I'm not sure if this western port would necessarily go by another name, but I thought it was worth including here for good measure, in case we do get more details on this in the near future. The rest of the crew, along with Gerd, Goldberg, and presumably Roto, arrive as well in a flying rowboat called a Svar. Lilith mentions how Elbaf's climate is uniquely capable of supporting these technologies and phenomena, including island clouds, sea clouds, and rainbows, as we've seen across these few chapters, but more interestingly, she includes bubbles as well as the hover technology. Now, we first saw bubbles during the Shabadi Archipelago arc and learned that they were only able to hold their composition within the climate of the Yurugimon mangroves, and also seemingly were able to be used under the ocean in Fishman Island. While it's not completely clear if it's the same sort of bubble, we did see some sort of technology on Egghead, including the Pacifista's bubble shield and the bubble gun. This, along with the hover technology that we saw used by the Dom Shoes, is going to allow Lilith to be more in her element in this arc. Now, it makes sense for sea clouds and islands clouds to be able to exist on Elbaf, given how high up the country must be, but I wonder if this means that the resin bubbles are also native to Elbaf and can be produced naturally. Also, along with the country being amongst the clouds, perhaps some of the Straw Hat styles that no longer work on the Blue Sea could make a reappearance. After all, we did see Usopp tinkering with a dial-shaped object on the way to Elbaf. This chapter also brought us the fateful reunion between the Straw Hats and the new Giant Warrior Pirates. It seems Luffy is still not super keen on the idea of having a grand fleet, but the Giants insist. Interestingly, Roto interjects and includes himself among the group, despite having been annoyed at the idea of serving a human in the past, so it seems he may have finally seen the capabilities of the Straw Hats and deemed them worthy. You'll also note that Roto is now crucified, creating another fun parallel between the self-proclaimed sun god and Loki. Hyrule expresses his joy for the Straw Hats becoming an emperor and explains how happy Elbaf was when they heard the news about Big Mom and Wano. We briefly saw the world learning about the events after the end of the arc, but it was never made clear whether or not Big Mom was truly dead. Some of the Blackbeard Pirates crew members seem to think so, as we saw when they spoke with their hostage Pudding, but ultimately, Big Mom's status is still up in the air, both for us as readers and within the world of One Piece. I, for one, would welcome her return in any capacity, whether that means occupying a small antagonistic role in Elbaf, or taking action against the Blackbeard Pirates to save Pudding, or even something much less exciting such as her having lost her memories and living the rest of her life as Lin and not Big Mom. This may even allow her to rekindle her friendship with Gerd, as she does seem to express some sadness over what happened to her. Now, all of this is old news to us, but the Straw Hats express some confusion over why Big Mom matters to the Giants in particular, so I wonder if they'll get the story in full. Maybe that will be the perfect way to reintroduce Big Mom into this arc. And really quick, in the crowd, you can spot a few interesting and/or familiar faces. Over here we have the mustached pirate that we saw amongst the Giant Warrior Pirates, and down to the left is a burly man with a very specific circular tattoo design that vaguely resembles a giant that we saw during Big Mom's flashback, though it's not really certain if that's the same character. And there's even a bear that looks much closer to the bear that we saw Big Mom defeat in her flashback, rather than the terror bear that we saw in the underworld. Of note, we also saw one of these more traditional looking bears near the silhouetted man from the last chapter, suggesting that he may be on the same layer as our crew. While the Giants had prepared a huge feast for the Straw Hats, the crew prioritizes Robin's reunion with Saul. Now, it was never clear just how much the rest of the crew knew about her backstory. When we first got it back in Anya's lobby, all that was really expressed to the Straw Hats explicitly was a high-level overview of what happened to her loved ones. There's been an SBS question asking how much the later Straw Hats know about the journeys of the ones that joined before them, and I suppose by extension, this could also apply to their individual backstories, but it's still not completely clear. During the battle against Black Maria on Onigashima, Brooke at the very least saw Robin approaching the illusions of her loved ones, and on Egghead, some of the crew was there to hear about Robin's mention of Saul during their conversation with Shaka. From this chapter, it seems the crew is aware of who Saul is in relation to Robin, suggesting that they were filled in on that information at some point in time, perhaps even in this chapter. Luffy even demands to pay his respect to Saul, as it's the honorable thing to do. Now, this is also quite reminiscent of Ace wanting to thank Shanks for saving Luffy. We then get to the Owl Library at the Warrior Springs. Owls are of course historically associated with knowledge and learning, and Gerd being the one to guide the crew to Saul may suggest that she's somewhat of a scholar herself. After all, she is the doctor of her crew, and has a pet owl named Piper, playing into this whole motif. We presumably saw the interior of this library back during the Egghead arc during Shaka's explanation of his history with Ohara, but the exterior is quite interesting as well, what with the beach being formed up in the treetops. Now, it's not completely clear to me if this is the area that we saw Saul during the Vegapunk's broadcast, given the presence of the underworld-esque mountains in the back, but that's neither here nor there. Just as the crew arrives, one of the researchers, or perhaps students, rushes out to inform them that Saul has fallen. This appears to be the same giant that we saw just a few chapters ago when we initially had that cliffhanger. While everyone expresses great concern over Saul's well-being, Robin just chuckles. This is of course because Saul has chosen to recreate their initial meeting. This sequence features many panels that were directly taken from Robin's flashback and updated for this moment. And I genuinely love this and love how much Saul has committed to the bit, just waiting face down with his face in the sand until Robin arrived. It's all very cute. With this, we get the long-awaited reunion between Robin and Saul. In universe, it's been 22 years, and in our real-world time, it's also been about 2 decades since the end of the Ohara flashback. Saul looks to be in pretty much the same attire as we last saw him, but one big difference is of course his peg leg. We don't actually see many characters with peg legs in the series, with the most iconic one being Zeph, so it's nice to see this sort of pirate element coming back into play here. This leg was even obfuscated when we saw him during Vegapunk's broadcast, with him having it crossed over the other one. It's not completely clear to me how he got this injury, the most likely explanation being some damage that he sustained from being frozen. When Saul washed up on the Ohara shore, he did mention that he hurt one of his legs, though it doesn't look to be the same one that ended up getting replaced. Coincidentally, Saul is now the second ex-Marine who was present at Ohara to have a missing leg, behind Kuzan. Now, we got another flashback to a scene from Ohara, with Olvia telling Robin to look toward the future and maintain hope. Saul asks Robin if she heard Vegapunk's message, and with this, we get some more tangible confirmation that the Straw Hats were not all completely tuned into the broadcast in its entirety. While they picked up on bits and pieces, they were mostly involved in the action on the island, so it's reasonable for them to have missed some of the bigger parts of the message. If even Robin, who ended up confined to her bed and had a snail nearby, could not make it out, then it would be impossible for someone like Luffy to have heard it at all. She explains that she learned about the details from the newspaper, likely in reference to the paper that we saw the crew reading just a few chapters ago. Now, Saul mentions Vegapunk's words, "History is told by the winners," and cites them back to the people of Ohara. We get this nice panel of the scholars, and from left to right we have Roshu, what looks to be Hocha in the back, Bushiri, Lint, Nico Olvia, Graham, Clover, Huck, and Zadie. He explains the importance of their sacrifices alongside Vegapunk's, and before he can bring up all the hardships Robin must have encountered, she stops him and asks to talk about the good things about how she survived, bringing on a wave of tears from her and Saul both. We end the chapter with the Straw Hats joining in with their tears over this heartfelt reunion, as the 3 highest bounties on the crew, Luffy, Zoro, and Jinbei, watch a bit more stoically, though Luffy can't help but smile himself. Friends, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for sticking around. The Elbaf arc continues to deliver each week, and I'm glad that we were able to address this reunion sooner rather than later. It lets us have Saul along with us for the rest of the adventure, and opens up a lot of space for what may be the real conflicts and climaxes of the arc. I can't wait for the next chapter in 2 weeks, which will be the last chapter of the year. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.